Hi there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When Obi-Wan Kenobi reveals the creation of the Separatist droid army to the Jedi and the Republic, there should have been widespread panic. The Republic was definitely not prepared for this conflict. Luckily, Master Kenobi also stumbled upon a clone army built and ready to serve the Galactic Republic. Nothing sketchy about that, right? Well, what if Darth Sidious and Tyrannus hadn't secretly ordered the clone army for the Republic? How do you think the Galactic Republic would have responded to the Separatist Alliance? Who would they have called? Now, the Galactic Republic wasn't completely undefended. You still had a branch of the government known as the Judicial Department. This department covered a lot of things, from the Supreme Court, which balanced out the executive and Senate branches, to the judicial forces, which basically patrolled on the hyperspace lanes and made sure things weren't going too crazy in the galaxy. While the judicial forces did receive military and police training, they were for the most part a peacekeeping force, a very under-equipped peacekeeping force. Aside from the consular-class cruisers, the judicials had very little in the form of actual war material, like proper capital ships or large teams of infantry soldiers. For the most part, judicials performed routine inspections, protected shipping lanes, and provided diplomatic escorts for Jedi consulars. When larger scale conflicts occurred, the judicials usually got help from local planetary defense forces or other factions. When the Stark Hyperspace War began more than 20 years before the Battle of Geonosis, it wasn't the Republic that responded to Stark's combined pirate fleet. Instead, it was Senator Ranulph Tarkin, a representative from Iradu, who took charge. Iradu was very unique because it was located in the Outer Rim, but also very wealthy. It was wealthy because the planet was self-sufficient and able to protect itself from the various pirate gangs in the area. The Tarkin family was actually responsible for creating the Outland Region Security Force, a very well-funded and well-equipped local militia that protected Iradu from any local threats. The Republic's judicial forces rarely ever appeared in this sector of space. The entire Tarkin family, including Wilhuff, would start their military career in the Outland Region Security Force and learn many important lessons about warfare there. Ranulph Tarkin and most of his family believed that the Republic needed to reinstate a strong federal military. Their unique perspective of the galaxy that started out in the very dangerous Outer Rim only emboldened their galactic view. And Tarkin wasn't alone in his feelings, as much of the Outer Rim was dealing with similar problems and a complete lack of government support. Now, the most powerful planetary or system defense fleets usually belong to larger planets, especially ones with a lot of industrial capabilities, especially worlds that had massive shipyards over them, like Kuat or Fondor. It was very typical to see massive super dreadnought class ships as a part of local defense forces in these core systems. And although we mainly just see clone troopers fighting in the Clone Wars on behalf of the Republic, several planetary defense forces were also involved in the combat. But due to the lack of proper equipment, training, morale, and funding, most planetary defense forces never left their home systems and were better at fighting from fixed defensive positions. Also, organizing PDFs into a larger force can be a huge headache. There's no uniformity, no clear chain of command that can be established. And on top of that, the logistical structures for sustaining these forces also had to be created, usually from thin air. And so while PDFs will play a large role in defending planets against any threat, their real purpose is to delay the enemy long enough for the regulars to arrive. One of the huge advantages of the clone trooper army and why it was approved by the Senate so quickly was that the clones weren't constituents of any of these representatives. I mean, this is the perfect army, ethical concerns aside, of course. Even if there are massive casualties or friendly fire incidents, it's not likely any family member or friends of the clone trooper who died will vote you out of office because of it. It also decreases war fatigue amongst your general population. You won't have anti-conscription protests or protests about the welfare of veterans. Heck, you might not even have any veterans, just clone trooper nutrient paste. Now, the thing with the clone troopers that really stopped them from being a viable option, in my opinion, is that they were way too expensive, especially for galactic-wide deployment, which is what the Republic needed. The Kaminoan clones also took a really long time to grow, 9 years. The Separatist Alliance had the right idea when they created their droid army. Just imagine how many B-1 battle droids you can produce in the time it takes to produce just one clone trooper. I'd go as far to say that if Palpatine hadn't been playing both sides of the war, the clone army most likely would have been overrun. Their numbers were just too little and their cost per unit was just too great. The Separatist Alliance had a huge economic advantage. Many of its members were disgruntled corporate entities that had enjoyed decades of unrestricted growth thanks to the free trade zone established in the Outer Rim. The idea was to attract private investment so that the entire area would be safer and more stable, but instead what happened, these companies swooped in and basically took control of everything and established miniature fiefdoms. They control and monopolize all goods flowing in and out of the area and basically have turned all the citizens of the Outer Rim into a slave workforce, or at least indentured servants. This, coupled with newly discovered planets full of resources and a very low operation cost, meant that the Separatists had the raw manufacturing output of a faction many times their size. But the Republic was still a lot larger than the Separatists from an economic and industrial standpoint. They also had a much larger population, which was important. Now, the Ruusan Reformation definitely limited military spending in the galaxy, but the military-industrial system was still intact and there were still plenty of vendors supplying private and local defense organizations. With the right type of leadership in place, the Republic could quickly retool all of its factories and industries to supply a massive droid army that can match the Separatist droid army. There are already tons of different security models available on the market that could quickly be adapted for combat uses, just like how the OOM series security droids used during the Battle of Naboo were quickly adapted to become the main battle droids for the Separatist Alliance. Not only will this robotic force be cheaper, it will again limit the exposure of Republic citizens to the battlefield. It would be by far the quickest army to generate, aside from maybe conscripting or just arming a bunch of random people with blasters. Now, there is one problem. Most of the raw resource production was limited to the Outer Rim, but the Republic could probably figure out a way to invade a mining planet and take over its supplies in the name of the war effort. Now let's talk about the Jedi. Why were they even placed in charge of the clone army in the first place? I mean, what kind of strategy is Yoda trying to pull off here? It looks like a massive frontal wave attack against fortified positions all across miles of open terrain without any cover. Usually this kind of order will create an uprising amongst your officers and men and usually lead to the death of the commanding officer. Luckily, all the clones at the time had the brains of 9-year-olds and were as obedient as droids, and so they all marched to their deaths. The Jedi were terrible commanders at the beginning of the war, and their restraint and philosophy to do no harm was exactly the opposite of what you would want from a military commander engaging soulless droids. Such ideas belong in peacekeeping, in the middle of a conventional battle between two evenly matched opponents. Not taking every opportunity and being aggressive against your enemy and being full of restraint could lead to a prolonged conflict and, increased casualties. For an officer to deliberately disobey an order because it's too aggressive or goes against the Jedi Code is a crazy situation that would not be accepted in any military. The Jedi were never really supposed to be a part of the military in the first place, and the clone commanders were more than competent at leading their own kind. The Jedi could be utilized as an auxiliary force of commandos. The Jedi were clearly infatuated with the Sith, so having the Order focus on taking down enemy Sith or dangerous combatants like General Grievous is really the only job they should be trained for. These jobs alone were dangerous enough. Let the Jedi focus on combat and not leading other men. Control over the Republic's military should have went to a group with more experience and training, like the Judicial Forces or maybe even some commanders from the Planetary Defense Forces. Even mercenaries can work. This is exactly what the Separatist Alliance did. They had a colorful assortment of commanders that controlled their automated army. Now, by this point, you've probably realized that without the clone army, the Republic's response to the Separatist crisis will be very patched together and involve various different factions and groups coming together to defend the Republic. At first, Planetary Defense Forces will be the only resistance that the Republic has. And their success in defending their planet will depend on how loyal these forces are to the Republic and how well prepared they are for an invasion. The Separatists in the opening days of the Clone Wars more or less focused only on Outer Rim worlds with very limited military resources. The Republic will probably try to quickly retool their industry to create a massive droid army. This will be a lot cheaper than any other form of military force, but during that period of transitioning your economic power into creating this army, the Republic and their individual planets will most likely look to soldiers of fortune for help. There are plenty of paramilitary organizations and factions scattered across the galaxy, ranging from the Mandalorian armies to the Black Sun's huge network of enforcers and thugs. Time and time again, various factions in the galaxy have called upon these contractors for aid. These pre-existing mercenary companies by far will be the quickest ones to be deployed to the battlefield. Most of them already have their own ships and logistical structures intact. The cost of a mercenary force, of course, will in general be more expensive than just building your own, so this isn't a long-term solution. Although it should be noted that during the Clone Wars, mercenaries were actually brought in to train the clone troopers because there was a lack of qualified infantry soldiers to do that job. So I guess the lesson here is that you should never try to completely ban a profession or an industry, in this case the military, because it takes many generations to build up the supply chains and the culture and the training systems to actually create this profession. Instead of abolishing it, the Republic maybe would have been better off trying to reform it and make it into a more peaceful organization with more restraint. Who knows? Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.